One by one, the people started to trickle into the room. They looked around with an assortment of emotions, some with awe, some with unconcealed fear or elation. All of them seemed to share a feeling betrayed on their face, however, curiosity. Despite everything, they looked around the big hall with a sense of wonder. But soon all their gazes locked on the platform at the far end of the hall. They had, of course, heard rumors about their royalty, wild tales about the queen and her court. Some of them they had witnessed. Lady Mary could be seen at night in the courtyard, dancing to some unheard tune. Her apparent madness was soon forgiven, however, when she visited the town's tavern to perform. Everyone would be enthralled by her enchanting voice, feeling as intoxicated as if they had had a few too many cups of mead. She would disappear after a song or two, leaving everyone in a state of peace and felicity. There were also whispers about the queen's justiciar, Mara. Nobody had any proof of her existence, though many spun outrageous stories about her. There was, of course, the incident with Miranda, the barmaid. A gentle, quiet girl who found many admirers among the tavern's customers. Despite her pleasant nature, she was also quite inquisitive, always trying to find out more about the royal court, asking everyone who might have interacted with them for their personal account. One night, one of the tavern's patrons, a young man in a hooded cloak, told her about a secret entrance to the castle and persuaded her to go and investigate. After hours, the man bought her generously filled cups of wine, and she eventually found the courage. Pulling on a traveling cloak, the young girl made out for the castle. She stayed in the shadows of the woods that bordered the castle grounds, and eventually reached the side of the keep. The closer she got to her destination, the more uneasy she started to feel. While she never saw a thing in the inky darkness that surrounded her, it felt as if she was being watched. Even so, she felt like she had already come this far, so she might as well see how much truth there had been in the man's words. For a while she fumbled around the roughly hewn stones of the wall, but then she found it, a small gap between the stone. Pushing all her weight against it, as the man had said, she slowly felt the wall give more and more until she was suddenly on the other side. The only lighting in sight was from nearly burnt-out torches lining the wall, but it was a welcome sight after the pure darkness she had traversed through. Her body was tense with anticipation, but she made her way through the tunnel she found herself in. The fire of the torches made the shadows dance in curious ways, but she paid it no mind. It wasn't until she found herself being hoisted up in the air roughly by said shadows that she realized what a big mistake she had made. Miranda let out a high-pitched screech as she felt all gravity disappear and her vision being completely blocked out. She tried struggling against the tendrils that had tightly wrapped around her arms and legs, but it was to no avail. Whatever had captured her, she was at its complete mercy. Then, as swiftly as it had grabbed her, it let her go. She plopped down unceremoniously onto the stone floor and frantically scrambled around for anything familiar. She was still shrouded in absolute darkness, and wherever she grasped, she just came upon more rugged walls and flooring. The girl crawled around sobbing until something made her stop dead in her tracks. Something strangely warm stroked her cheeks, which elicited another squeal. Instantly, she felt more of the tendril rubbing against her body. Struck by intense fear and disgust, she clumsily got to her feet and trailed quickly against the walls of her confinement. When her hands locked around the doorknob, she desperately pulled it open and threw herself back into the hallway. At once, her vision had restored. The dimmed lights were brilliant compared to the blackout from before, and her tear-filled eyes didn't help much either. The barmaid ran as fast as she could in the exact opposite direction she had come from. She barely even glanced at where she was going, sprinting down the winding corridors, till finally Maria bumped into a figure that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. looking up into a pair of glistening green eyes, she felt her panic instantly subside. "Oh my, you poor girl. You're not where you're supposed to be, are you?" The woman spoke gently, and her entire presence calmed the girl immensely. Miranda was taken by the hand and led through the hallway. She felt so safe with this strange woman, with her kind face framed by gorgeous locks of fiery red hair. "I am so sorry to see you in such a state. You looked scared half to death when you bounced into me." Miranda just nodded. "These dungeons can be frightening, I do agree. Your mind can start to play tricks on you, hmm?" The woman squeezed her hand softly. "It's quite all right. Why don't I just find someone to bring you back up to your home, and you forget about this whole adventure upon waking up?" Miranda nodded again, but she didn't agree. She knew what she had felt. As they walked through the narrow passages, Miranda had started to feel drowsy, to the point where she could barely remember feeling the woman scooping her up. The next morning she awoke in her own bed, but she hadn't forgotten. When she recounted her story of the night's events to her friends, they had just laughed it off, not believing Miranda to be brave enough to even undertake such a thing. But her stories were heard, and some took them a lot more serious. Lady Indigo, the queen herself, had been spotted a handful of times as well. She would make short appearances, keeping herself cloaked. Some of the inhabitants of the queendom had claimed to have more private experience with her, however. There was, of course, Miranda's brush with her after her break-in of the castle. A couple of young lads had also boasted about especially intimate entanglements with the red-headed vamp, but those were never taken very seriously. There was one case, however, that did have everyone murmur about for weeks after the fact. A young man, Parker, who had been intent on being a part of the Queen's royal guard since he was but a boy, and definitely had become very close to the Queen. He had been raised in a simple family. His parents owned a small candle shop where his mother kept bees and crafted items from their produce. His father had a job maintaining the royal grounds, specifically the gardens. Parker was, same as nearly everyone, raised a Christian. He had always found an exceptional amount of peace in his devotion to the Lord, more so than any of his peers. Every morning, before even the breaking of his fast, he would say his prayers. His days would always be filled with hard work. If he wasn't helping out his mother in the shop, he would be out practicing his skills with a longbow or assisting with chores in and around the local church. At first, he would be teased, but he wore his devotion and modesty with such pride that it was hard for anyone's words to hurt him. He eventually became somewhat of a popular sight around town, both because of his friendly and helpful nature and his drive to become a royal ranger. Even Lady Indigo herself had taken notice of his reputation and had attended a couple of his drills, her emerald gaze locked on him, watching as every single one of his arrows hit the mark. One particular winter, a mere fortnight before Parker's 18th birthday, he was called upon to join a patrol in the woods surrounding the castle. There had been talk of a beast roaming the forests, and a couple aspirant soldiers were taken along with the veterans in attempts to show them the ropes. Parker had eagerly donned his armor and cloak, outfitted himself with his bow and a quiver of arrows. Him and a few others set out on their horses, facing the crisp winter air and the gloomy woods. For a while the hunt was uneventful. The soldiers' only worries were the biting cold and steering their mounts through the thickening foliage. As they ventured deeper into the woods, however, a sense of dread started to settle among the men. Parker, the pious warrior of the Lord that he was, didn't let this despair take a hold of him, and he urged his horse forward. And just as he did, a nearby growling could be heard. The horses started to act nervous, sniffing the air wildly, filling it with condensation. Then, like an arrow being fired from a bow, a wild shape shot from the shadows. Parker only caught a glimpse of the dark, agile form, but it couldn't have been anything other than the creature they were hunting. Before any of them could take action, their mounts scrambled in different directions, taking their unfortunate riders with them. The young gardener's son was led deeper into the forest until his stallion came to a sudden stop. The sudden jolts made him lose control of the reins, and he slid out of the saddle, landing in the icy snow. Before he could get up and retrieve his horse, a piercing howl made it bolt. Containing himself, he brushed off the snow from his cloak and went to check for his weapons. As he turned around to draw an arrow from his quiver, the beast was upon him. The smell was overpowering, wild and feral like wet fur, like the pups he would play with in his youth, but with a savage streak that made his blood turn icy. The massive wolf howled again, and Parker could do nothing but lie paralyzed as it pinned him down. That was until the pain hit him. The furred monster on top of him raked his claws over the boy's chest, piercing his armor effortlessly. Parker's eyes rolled back, and he let out a single, blood-curdling wail as his flesh was ripped to shreds. He barely had time to register the beast sinking his teeth in his throat before he felt all weight leave him in an instant. His vision was blurred, seeing only the outlines of the trees and moon above him as his body jerked in his death throes. A ringing sound filled his ears and mixed with more ripping, shredding yelps of agony. His last thoughts were with his faith, and he welcomed the warm embrace of the afterlife that was surely coming for him. Parker drifted in and out of consciousness until everything went still. Then footsteps crunching in the snow as they neared him. Suddenly his vision was filled with the face of an angel, framed with blazing locks of hair. He felt a soft hand caress his cheek, icy like the snow beneath, and a moment before it all went black, a warm, sticky fluid seeping down his throat.